Hey guys, and welcome to the Fish Room. I'm Rachel O'Leary, and the time has finally come to redo the retirement community. Now, this is a 75-gallon aquarium that I've had running for about 13 years now, and it's gone through a ton of changes over the years, but one thing that has remained the same is the substrate in the tank. And over time, this substrate, which was Soil Master Select, which is technically a golf turf, has really broken down and become muddy, and it just, no matter how much you clean it, it is always full of gunk. So this past week I spent the entire week cleaning it up, removing it, replacing it, rescaping, and just making what I think is a much nicer aquarium for the fish room. So today we're going to go on that journey together, and again, it took me about a week. But I think the results are pretty great. But as always, I want to hear from you guys. So let me know down in the comments what you think of this rescape and what sort of fish you'd like to see added to this aquarium. Let's get started. Now, this aquarium has not been a showpiece for a very long time. Back in the day, it was a discus breeding tank. And then after that, it's had many, many manifestations. And one of the things with being an importer and retailer of tropical fish is you sometimes end up with leftovers. So I think it's important to have an aquarium that they can go to that'll be safe. So there's nothing aggressive in here. The most aggressive thing in here are my pelvicochromis or my crebensis, which are a dwarf cichlid, and they really don't bother anybody. So all I'm going to do is just give this substrate a good thorough cleaning for a couple of days leading up to its removal, and then that way if there's any super big pockets of detritus, they'll get removed, and we'll also start pulling out some of this hardscape. Now I'll have to be pretty careful when I'm pulling out this hardscape because there are tons and tons of these, well, there's an ammono shrimp, of these larger ancestris which like to hide inside the wood. And this is a really nice piece of wood, so I may end up reusing this one, but we'll have to see what the plan is. Now, I would like to set up sand in this aquarium. You can see this is a gorgeous piece of wood, so we'll probably reuse that one. But for now, I just want to get out. This aquarium has Malaysian wood, it has Mopani wood, and it has the Manzanita. And I'd like it to have a more uniform look. Of course, it is working, but not to my satisfaction. I'm just making sure there's no plecos inside any of this wood as I remove it. And this will just allow me to be able to better access the substrate for cleaning. Oh, look at all that debris being stirred up. So I do recommend, if you're going to be changing out a substrate or changing up a scape, to really spend a few days leading up to the big changes doing some deep cleanings. It'll really make your life easier in the long run, especially during refill and rescape, to have a lot of this dirt and debris just cleaned up. It's really common underneath driftwood to have a bunch of accumulated just gross that it can be difficult to get to. Now, there's nothing technically wrong with combining all the different types of wood. I just find that it doesn't give as nice of an aesthetic appeal. So I prefer to use singular types. So what we'll do today is we'll pull out all this wood and then come back tomorrow and start with the substrate removal. Now what I'm going to do now is just refill this and then probably come back later today and do this process again. So these are the plants and the wood and the filter that I pulled out of the aquarium. You can see it was quite a mishmash of stuff. I do plan on reusing all of these plants and some of the wood. The main goal, though, is to preserve and replant this giant, impressive lace plant that is a testament to how big plants get at maturity. Just sticking it in a bucket until I'm ready to replant it after the tank has been switched out. Up next, I just moved the caves that had the ancestris in them with the ancestris in the cages, or caves rather, and caught all the fish that I could. It wasn't exactly an easy task, but with the water drop this low, it certainly makes things easier than it would have been otherwise with all the decor inside. So what I'm going to do now is just drain the rest of the water and then start removing that old dirt so that I can rinse out the tank really well, clean the glass, and get prepared to start the rebuild of this aquarium. It's going to probably take me all this week to do so. Now I'm quite literally just going to scoop out all the substrate into my bucket. And then I'm going to throw this, actually I'll probably add this to a garden somewhere because it'd still be fine for like top dressing in some of my bins. Like on some of those plants. It's just so old. And really, you know, it's not held up deceptively or surprisingly well. Scooping it out was a process. I did it over several hours, and I did end up dumping all of that stuff into a garden. Now, I ended up using pool filter sand, and that's mainly because I didn't want to have to rinse it. This stuff is $10 a bag. It's got a really nice color. It's got a really nice texture, and you can buy it anywhere that there's a pool store. It's pre-rinsed, so you can simply just dump it in the aquarium. I had originally bought play sand, which is a bit cheaper, but I decided I didn't feel like rinsing it, and I really like the color and the look of this stuff, and it's super, super easy to plant in, which you'll see in a little bit. Again, I just dumped the entire bag in the aquarium. It was slightly cloudy, but really not bad at all. And again, it's just a really cheap, pretty solution if you want to give a sand makeover in your aquarium. I just spread it around, so it was about 2 inches thick. This was a 50-pound bag, and it covered about 2/3 of my aquarium with plenty of depth for root development of the plants that I'm going to use. This aquarium isn't going to have a lot of heavy root feeders other than that big lace plant, but we'll address that in a second. You can see there's still a fish in there. I did end up catching him shortly after this. He was just really difficult to catch, so he got to hang out a bit longer than the other fish did. Up next, I grabbed some of my tropical soil that I've had laying around forever. And back in that back left corner, which is where I wanted to plant that lace plant, I just dumped an entire bag of that. And the only reason I did that is because the lace plant is a heavy root feeder, and the tropical soil has, you know, all sorts of nutrients in it that will help prevent me needing to use a lot of fertilizers. Eventually I may have to use root tabs. But this is an easy way to not break the bank, utilizing a soil substrate for the entire tank, but still get the benefits for the plants that need it. I then just took some small river stones that I've collected over the years and made a bit of a barrier. Over time, the substrates would mix otherwise, just as part of the natural maintenance and disruption of the aquarium. And I started with the larger river stones in the front and went back to smaller stones. Things in the front often look bigger, things in the back look smaller, so this just helps with the perspective. And I think I'm going to try and do some sort of path, not a hard path like you see in a lot of aquascapes, but sort of a gentle path over on that side. I then added back in that piece of wood that I particularly liked and started looking through a bunch of the other scraps I have laying around. I've shown you guys in the past how I'm a horrible, horrible hoarder with this stuff, but the reality is most of these hardscape materials don't go bad. They can sit in your yard. They don't have to be kept out of the weather or anything. And if you see a piece that really strikes your fancy or inspires you, pick it up and set it aside for future use. I have tons and tons and tons of materials, and it really makes it easy when it comes time to scape these tanks to just go out and see what inspiration strikes me, and I just simply do a bunch of trial and error with various pieces until I get something that I like the look of. I don't follow any of the rules of aquascaping. I don't measure my tank, draw out rule of thirds, or do anything like that. I just go with my instinct. Next, I wanted to make sure I got this giant lace plant positioned so that I could see how much space was in the aquarium. This is a 75-gallon aquarium, and this plant does take up at least half of it. Because of that as well, it'll also shade any plants that are underneath it, so I need to choose carefully, making sure I pick low light plants that'll be in that shaded section. For the most part for this aquarium, I'm going to be utilizing Anubias and the Cryptwentii tropica that I took out of the previous manifestation of this aquarium. And I also had a bunch of pots left over from when I did my 55-gallon impulsive aquascape with the purple Carry Tetras. So I'm just utilizing a bunch of just leftover plants. I truly did not buy anything for this aquarium but the $10 bag of sand. Although I realize I have a lot more stuff at my disposal than the average hobbyist. For me, this was probably one of the cheapest tank makeovers I've ever done in my entire career. And we'll see how it turns out. So far, I like it. I did throw in some African water fern or bulbitis in there. The larger Anubias is Coffeeifolia. The smaller ones are Anubias barteri nana. There's some Anubias bonsai. Again, placing the bigger plants in the front and the smaller ones in the back to sort of help with that feeling of depth in this aquarium. I then took a melamine sponge and just wiped down the interior glass to get any accumulated algae. It looked clear, but as you can see from my sponge, there was quite a bit that was on there that just wasn't particularly visible. I also did the outside of the glass and wiped it down. These are more additional crypts from that impulsive aquascape. And again, I just removed the rock wool, split them into decent sized pieces, and plant them in groupings. In this aquarium, at the base or bottom of the different pieces of wood that were jutting out into the middle of the aquarium. In time, these will probably fill in and carpet across the tank. And for planting in sand like this, I don't find that I need to use tools. It's so easy to just push them into the sand and they stay put, which is one thing I really like about aquascaping in sand. Some of the soils are really, really lightweight, and you have to be very careful when planting in them or all the plants just get disrupted. With sand like this, it really grabs onto those roots and is so easy to use. I think it's a really great solution for beginners or advanced aquarists as well, but definitely the easiest thing to plant into in my experience at least. So this is how it looks now. I just go around periodically and clean up any floating debris from the surface. You can see the tank is slightly cloudy, but really for jumping in 2 types of substrate with no rinsing, it's not bad. I decided that the black soil really bothered me, and I had a bunch of leftover Carib Sea Supernaturals, superfine gravel from the 150-gallon hill stream. So I decided to place that on the edge of this pathway as well as all over the dark soil to make it look a little less obvious. In time, these will sift together a bit, and I think it'll give a really natural feeling. For now, I'm not totally sold on how like orangey brown this gravel looks, but again, I think over time and with a little bit of mixing, it's going to look really, really nice. Now, I did have to put a rock on top of my driftwood in order to hold it down until it's totally waterlogged, but I'm not particularly concerned about that. I also decided I wanted to put in some of that Hygrophila siamensis in the back to fill in and create sort of a wall feeling back there. And I also decided I needed more rocks. Basically, every time I go for walks, I collect these little river stones and just bring them home. I'm sort of like, a 3-year-old who likes shiny rocks. I decided to put some in little groupings at the base of all the wood and to increase the amount in front of that lace plant, as I don't think I'm going to plant anything in particular underneath that other than some Anubias between the rocks. And now I was just sort of going on my artistic whim, trying to tie that path of rocks on the left to the rest of the aquarium. There is some trial and error. The nice thing about playing with materials like this is if you don't like it, you can just take it out and try something else, which I did a ton of times in this aquarium, and I'll probably continue to do over the next few weeks as I spend time looking at this aquarium. All of these things, one of the reasons that I like substrates like this is that it doesn't have to be plug and play. It's not like dirt where once you plant the plants, you really don't want to disrupt them because it'll release all that dirt into the water column. It's really nice to use a substrate like this that I can sort of shift things around and go through trial and error until I find out what I really like. Now, the vast majority of the fish I took out of this aquarium will probably go back into this aquarium, though I may try and rehome those giant albino ancestris as well as some of the barbs. But I do think that I'll be moving most of the South American stuff back in here and maybe even in that crib pair. I really think that the fish are going to interact really nicely throughout all this hardscape, as well as all the plants that I've provided, and there's certainly a lot of different cave structures. I'm thinking I might want to add some groups of Coreodoros into this aquarium because they would especially appreciate the sand. The sand is amazing for fish who like to sift substrate or who like to bury their faces as part of their natural feeding strategy or part of their natural breeding strategy. As always, I'd like to hear from you guys. What would you like to see me add to this aquarium? Right now, I have so many empty tanks. I can move the other oddball fish around until I find them either permanent homes or a permanent solution. So far, though, I think this aquarium is shaping up pretty nicely. We'll see how all the plants settle in and how that lace plant does. I'm really hoping it's going to throw another flower for me. But as always, I want to hear from you guys. Make sure you're subscribed with that notification bell on so you don't miss any of the upcoming updates on this video or as well as all my other projects and aquariums.